On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 young hikers sliced open their tent high in Russia's Ural Mountains and ran barefoot into a blizzard, never to return, in what would become known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In the weeks that followed, search parties would discover their bodies scattered across the snow, some nearly naked in sub-zero temperatures, others with catastrophic internal injuries but almost no external wounds, transforming a tragic accident into one of history's most enduring mysteries. History defined. This educational documentary script is based on real historical records, declassified files, and later scientific studies of the Dyatlov Pass case. It explores how one winter expedition went horribly wrong and why, even today, no single explanation fully fits the evidence. It includes descriptions of death, injury, and disturbing circumstances, but it does not promote or glorify violence or conspiracy thinking of any kind. Its purpose is purely historical and cultural, examining how fear, secrecy, and the power of nature collided on a remote Soviet mountainside. Viewer discretion is advised. History defined. In the winter of 1959, a group of students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk prepared for a ski trek that would qualify them for an elite Soviet hiking certification, a prestigious achievement in that era's sports culture. Their leader, 23-year-old engineering student Igor Dyatlov, was experienced, disciplined, and respected, and his companions, most in their early 20s, 8 men and 2 women, had already completed challenging expeditions together. They carefully logged supplies, tuned their skis, and carried notebooks and cameras to document every step, turning the journey into both a sporting challenge and a personal adventure. History defined. The route was demanding, from city trains to trucks, then deep into the northern Ural Mountains, a harsh frontier of dense forest, frozen rivers, and treeless ridges. In late January, the group set off, joking, singing, and posing for photographs with locals along the way. Their diaries captured the mix of fatigue, camaraderie, and optimism that defines long expeditions. They skied through bitter winds and heavy snow, building makeshift shelters and sharing simple meals, always planning for the next day with the precision expected of serious Soviet tourists and engineers. History defined. Eventually, worsening weather forced them higher onto an exposed slope of a mountain, known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, often translated as Dead Mountain, a name that would later sound ominous in hindsight. There, above the tree line, the wind roared across the face of the mountain, stripping away heat and turning even small mistakes into life-threatening risks. Instead of retreating to the forest below, the group pitched a large shared tent on the slope, perhaps to avoid losing altitude they had already gained, or to practice camping in more extreme conditions, a choice that remains one of the most debated decisions of the trip. History defined. Inside that tent, on the evening of February 1st, they cooked a modest meal and wrote a few final diary entries, joking about the cold and the difficulty of the trail. Their photos from that day show smiles, snow-caked clothing, and the kind of confident exhaustion familiar to anyone who has pushed themselves in nature and still felt in control. Yet, sometime in the dark hours that followed, something happened that shattered that control, because when rescuers finally reached the site, they found the tent collapsed, partly buried, and cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had slashed their way out in terror. History defined. The alarm back in Sverdlovsk began quietly, with families and friends noticing that the promised telegram confirming a safe return never arrived. At first, delays were brushed off as normal. Experienced hikers often ran behind schedule when weather turned bad. But as days turned into weeks, concern hardened into fear, and a large search operation was launched, involving fellow students, local volunteers, and eventually the Soviet military, who had the aircraft and manpower to scour the mountains. History defined. On February 26th, searchers spotted a partly collapsed tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, its fabric torn and snow-covered, with skis and poles still standing nearby like mute sentries. Inside were nearly all of the hikers' boots, coats, and warm clothing, along with food and equipment, evidence that they had left in a hurry, without even taking the items that stood between them and certain death in the Arctic cold. From the tent, a trail of footprints led downhill toward the forest. Remarkably, investigators noted that many of the prints appeared to be made by bare feet, socked feet, or thin indoor footwear rather than snow boots. History defined. Following those fading tracks into the tree line nearly 1.5 kilometers away, search teams found the first grim discovery: the bodies of two hikers lying near the remains of a small campfire beneath a tall cedar tree. They were wearing only underwear and light garments, totally inadequate for temperatures that could plunge far below freezing, suggesting an almost unimaginable level of desperation or disorientation. The cedar's branches were broken several meters up, indicating that someone had climbed the tree, perhaps to look for the tent, to escape something on the ground, or to gain a vantage point in the howling darkness. History defined. Between the cedar and the tent, 3 more bodies were discovered: Dyatlov himself and 2 others, positioned as though they had been crawling or staggering uphill when they collapsed. Their arrangement, roughly in a line back toward the tent, painted a heartbreaking picture of a group trying to return to shelter, growing weaker step by step until the cold finally stopped them. Rescue operations continued for months, but the final 4 hikers remained missing until the spring thaw. They were eventually found in a small ravine deeper in the woods, buried beneath meters of snow. History defined. It was in that ravine that the mystery deepened dramatically. Autopsies showed that some of the last 4 had severe internal trauma: multiple fractured ribs, crushed chest cavities, and one with a serious skull injury, yet their bodies showed relatively little external damage, as if they had been subjected to a massive force that did not leave the usual marks. One woman was missing her tongue and parts of her facial soft tissue, a detail that investigators attributed to natural decomposition and animal activity, but that later storytellers would seize upon as proof of something darker. History defined. Medical examinations concluded that several hikers died from hypothermia, which fit the lack of proper clothing and the brutal environment, but others were listed as having died from their injuries some experts compared to those from a high-speed car crash. A few pieces of clothing were reported to show elevated levels of radioactivity, an odd but not necessarily criminal detail in an era when many industrial and military materials carried such traces. Nonetheless, this finding fed rumors of secret weapons and government experiments. Officially, investigators closed the case with a vague statement that the group perished due to an overwhelming force of nature, without naming any human culprit or natural disaster in particular. History defined. In the Soviet Union of 1959, where secrecy and state control over information were standard, the lack of a clear explanation and the classification of some documents created fertile ground for rumor. Families of the dead received limited, carefully filtered information, while access to the area around Dyatlov Pass was reportedly restricted for a time, further fueling speculation that the government was hiding something. As the years passed, the story spread through whispers, then through samizdat, and eventually through books, documentaries, and online forums, evolving from a local tragedy into a global obsession. BuzzFeed +1. Over time, a long list of competing theories emerged. Some of them attempt to stay anchored in physics, meteorology, and survival psychology, while others veer into the supernatural or the conspiratorial. One of the most scientifically argued explanations is the snow slab avalanche theory, which suggests that a small but dense block of snow slid onto the tent, partially burying it and creating enough pressure to injure some hikers and terrify the rest. Recent modeling work, inspired partly by techniques used in animation and avalanche research, has shown that such a slab could produce injuries similar to those found on the bodies, without completely erasing the tent or leaving obvious avalanche debris. BuzzFeed +1. Closely related is the katabatic wind hypothesis, which focuses less on snow movement and more on sudden, violent downdrafts of cold air sweeping down the slope. In that scenario, the group may have feared that the tent would be torn away or crushed, forcing them to cut their way out quickly and head downslope toward the forest for shelter, intending to return once conditions stabilized. In support of this idea, survival experts note that people caught in extreme weather sometimes make seemingly irrational choices that, in context, are flawed attempts at rapid problem-solving under intense stress. History defined. Other theories dive deep into Cold War paranoia. Some writers argue that the hikers stumbled into the vicinity of a secret military test, perhaps involving parachute mines, high-explosive devices, or experimental technology that generated shock waves capable of causing internal injuries. According to this line of thought, bright lights or explosions in the sky might have driven the group from the tent, with the later injuries and scattered positions being collateral damage from weapons whose existence officials wanted to conceal. History defined. More imaginative explanations involve so-called infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that some researchers claim can induce panic and unease in humans, or mysterious glowing orbs seen in the night sky, often framed as UFOs or paranormal entities. In these stories, the hikers are portrayed as victims of a force beyond normal understanding, transforming the case from an extreme survival scenario into a campfire horror tale. Local Mansi legends about sacred places and spirits around Kholat Syakhl are sometimes folded in, but there is no credible evidence that members of the indigenous community attacked the hikers. In fact, Mansi hunters participated in the search efforts. BuzzFeed +1. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, previously restricted documents began to surface, giving independent researchers access to original case files, photographs, and autopsy notes. These materials allowed historians, journalists, and scientists to re-examine the evidence without the same political pressures that existed in 1959, though many records were incomplete or of uneven quality. In recent years, Russian authorities have formally revisited the case and publicly leaned toward natural explanations, such as a form of avalanche, while acknowledging that not every detail can be fully reconstructed decades later. History defined. International teams have also studied the pass using modern tools, satellite imagery, terrain mapping, avalanche simulations, and updated knowledge about hypothermia, paradoxical undressing, and group decision-making under stress. These efforts tend to support the idea that a combination of environmental hazards, unstable snow, brutal wind, low visibility, and intense cold, plus human choices under pressure, can explain much of what happened. even if some aspects, like the exact sequence of movements and injuries, remain uncertain. That lingering uncertainty, that stubborn set of loose ends, is precisely what keeps the Dyatlov Pass incident alive in the public imagination. BuzzFeed +1. The story resonates because it condenses so many of humanity's deepest fears into a single event. Being isolated in a hostile landscape, facing an invisible or poorly understood threat, and realizing that expertise and preparation are not always enough. These 9 hikers were intelligent, fit, and trained. They trusted in their skills and each other, yet nature, or perhaps a chain of rare circumstances, still overwhelmed them. At the same time, the historical context of the late 1950s Soviet Union, with its culture of secrecy, censorship, and bureaucratic opacity, ensured that families never received full, clear answers, inviting speculation to fill the void. History defined. Today, Dyatlov Pass is both a physical location and a global symbol. Hikers and tourists can trek the route, visit memorials, and stand where the tent once stood, looking out over the same desolate slopes and forests that surrounded the group on their final night. Online, thousands of people pore over every grainy photo and line of scanned reports, debating avalanche angles, wind speeds, and footprints, turning a remote Soviet tragedy into a shared worldwide puzzle. BuzzFeed +1.
Yet for all the theories, models, and arguments, one simple fact remains. Only those 9 hikers truly knew what they saw, heard, and felt in the last moments before they cut open the tent and stepped into the darkness. Their diaries stop before the crucial decision. Their cameras hold no final revealing image, and their bodies, recovered long after the storm, tell only part of the story. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures not just because it is frightening, but because it is incomplete.